We have a special guest today, and any of you that don't know that haven't been watching. This is, I call him Eddie Eagle because I can't think of another name for him, but they've had this eagle out here yesterday in the Senate and walked through the rotunda with it, and then they were in the House today. I think they're going to be in the Resources Committee. This is the Peregrine Fund, and they've been out here in years gone by, and they've usually brought their Alpamato Falcon, which is they're doing restoration with and stuff. But this is a treat for us to have Eddie here. It doesn't have a name, but Eddie Eagle comes to mind for me, the ski jumper and stuff. And I'm going to give the people from the Peregrine Fund a few minutes to explain what they do and stuff, and then I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce a special friend of mine to say a couple words.
You may want to move.
Am I safe?
They are predators. I mean.
When you bring him into my office tomorrow, is my stuffed wolf in there going to cause a problem? I didn't want to hear this. Ah!
They just go for the neck.
Yeah.
They want to duck and cover down.
How much does this bird weigh?
She's about 10 and a half pounds.
10 and a half?
Oh, Eddie is a she.
10.6.
It's a she?
Edwina.
Maybe it's Edna.
It's Edwina. Edwina, yeah.
That's good. Edwina.
How old is she?
She is 17 years old this spring.
So is that old?
Out in the wild, late teens, is pretty good average in an education setting like ours.
She can live to be into her 40s.
Yeah. So her and I will teach together another 25 or 30
Yeah.
years of her career.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
That's awesome.
Now we can all thank that wiser heads prevailed than Frank, or what's his name? Benjamin Franklin, that wanted the turkey for our national bird. Isn't that a beautiful animal?
Is she nervous with us?
No, for her, people are a reward. They are exciting and interesting, where a lot of wild eagles will avoid people. Yep, for her, she's an injured bird of prey, so that's why we have her. And so a room full of people is nothing better for her.
Did she grow up in the wild then?
She started out there, yep. She was injured when she was about 6 weeks old, and so she's been in an education or rehab setting ever since then.
Was she injured because her parents threw her out of the nest teaching her how to fly?
It's a good question. She was maybe pulled or pushed from the nest. It's
Yeah.
not unusual for siblings to do
Yeah.
that.
Is it okay if I take a picture now?
Sure, yeah.
It's kind of a fan.
Anybody, if you want a picture next to Edwina, and then I'm going to give the Peregrine Fund a few minutes to talk about their operations and what they do.
Oh, you guys, you look great together. She looks like she might take a little bite out of your head. Okay.
Oh, yes, I do. Sorry.
It's like next to my computer.
Retakes. Gotta look good in the eagle shot.
Isn't that a beautiful animal, though? Don't you wish your eyes were as sharp as them?
I have multiple eagles who live like where I am,
Yeah.
so I can step out of my house and they're in a spruce tree, like as far as,
Yeah.
so they'll be up in the tree. Obviously, I've never been this close to one of them, but it's kind of amazing because I look at them all the time.
I do too. We got a couple that live in some cottonwoods that are close to us. There you go.
I know, oh my goodness.
Yeah. Oh no.
Thank you. Okay, forget the earrings. This is,
I knew Stuart would cause a problem.
it's so good that there's so
Even the eagle knows there's a problem here.
This was
Yeah.
these awards at the White House this week, so they had
What's the wingspan?
Better. Yeah.
What's the wingspan on that bird?
like, you know, people weren't like,
6.5 feet?
I can't zoom.
Do you need somebody else to take it?
It's not working. It's mostly for my kids.
Isn't that a beautiful animal, though?
Yeah, she just, as soon as she comes out, you just go, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. How much, like, in the wild, could she like lift a rabbit, something that heavy?
Yes, something about half of their body weight is generally what they can carry away. So at like 10.5 pounds, she'd easily be able to carry a rabbit.
Half their body weight? That's crazy.
I live on a golf course. The hole is behind me, and there's some cottonwoods on the other side there, and we've got a couple eagles that live up there. And you'll watch them out there, and pretty soon they'll come down, and they'll be scooting down the freeway or down the fairway and stuff of the golf course. I make sure my little poodle's in the house when they're out looking for food. But it's fascinating to watch them.
Yeah.
They're amazing.
They actually, in this cottonwood, they had built a nest, and a strong wind came up a few years ago and blew the nest down, and it was like a Volkswagen Beetle.
Yes.
It was huge.
Yeah.
And they actually came back and rebuilt it in the same place, which I think is kind of, they don't usually do that, do they?
If there's good hunting ground, why give it up?
Yeah.
She's beautiful.
I'm going to give you a couple words to talk about the Peregrine Fund and what they do.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, ranking member, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. Come and share with you. I'm sure this is how you start most of your meetings.
Yeah.
My name is Chris Parrish. I'm the Peregrine Fund's president and CEO. And we're very happy to make our first trip with executive level change. And I've been with the Peregrine Fund for 23 years and recently taken the job of president and CEO. We have members of our executive staff here, and we are introducing ourselves so that people know who the Peregrine Fund is. We have endangered species. Everybody knows that key word, right? Endangered Species Act. The Peregrine Fund is a private nonprofit group. We work globally to work with threatened and endangered birds all around the world. Our focus is delisting, not listing. We're not a litigious-based group. We do work by working with stakeholders to solve problems after we come to understand the system and the science behind it. We're a science-based organization. We don't litigate. We work with those stakeholders to solve problems. The peregrine falcon, thus our namesake, is one of another great stories, just like the recovery of the bald eagle, and they've been delisted. And that next one on deck is probably the California condor. We want you all to know that we're a resource for you when it comes to anything in a system, because these birds are an apex predator. When raptors are healthy, ecosystems are healthy. And our understanding of that should be of a resource for you all, and we hope to play that role. We've been around for 53 years, and if we're doing our jobs well, we'll be around for another 100, and hopefully be a resource for all of our natural resources to help in that. So thank you for the opportunity.
Where are you headquartered?
Boise, Idaho.
Oh, okay. I just thought I'd bring that up. I wasn't sure. But we have an area out there called Birds of Prey
Yes, we do.
that the Peregrine Fund operates with and stuff. And it is, I would encourage anybody, if you're just coming through Boise, if you're going to have to see NIFC or something like that, go out to the Peregrine Fund, take a couple hours and look at it. You'll be fascinated by the work that they have out there.
And if you happen to be available, we have on Earth Day this year the grand opening of our new visitor center. She's excited about it.
Yeah.
Our new visitor center on Saturday 22nd. Is that correct? Saturday the 22nd, we're going to have a ribbon cutting and open up our new center where we host thousands of school children that come to know raptors and what it means to do conservation and what it means to preserve our heritage, and they come through and visit. We also have the archives of falconry there, and that's another unique thing about the Peregrine Fund. We're founded by falconers, one of the oldest forms of hunting within human history. And so our perspective comes from a relationship with the birds, and when we add science to that, it makes it, I think, a unique insight into landscape systems and, most importantly, our systems, because wildlife conservation is people working with people. So thank you for the
I appreciate that. And thank you for, we have a couple of things today.
You've been,
Yeah. I said we have a special guest, and I didn't mean you. I mean,
I saw him last night.
okay, but it's also my pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine who has been Idaho State U.S. Senator from Idaho, been governor of Idaho, and he's been the Secretary of Interior. And I'm not talking about Ryan Zinke. He's been the Secretary of Interior, but Dirk Kempthorne. Do you want to say a few words, Dirk?
The better secretary.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman and ranking member and all members of the committee, first of all, thank you for your service to the member. Mike, to you as a dear friend, thank you for your service to the member.
You bet.
Mr. Secretary, nice to be with you again. When I had the honor of being Secretary of the Interior, I also had the honor of delisting the American bald eagle. Because I believe that the Endangered Species Act, which now is so prominent on listing a species, but not recovery, and we must get to recovery. And that's why when they asked me to serve on the Peregrine Fund board, I said yes. Chris mentioned the peregrine falcon, but you need to realize that the captive breeding that took place, Mr. Chairman, there at the World Center Birds of Prey in Idaho, released 4,000 peregrine falcons. And today, when you see falcons here, high rises in New York City or the Grand Canyon, it's about a 99% probability that they are the progeny of those released in Idaho. So that the results are there. They're on 5 continents. We have professors, botanists, scientists deployed throughout the world. It's helping indigenous people in the areas where we're teaching them how they can help us with stewardship and not lose the lands which they hold so dear, giving their children. We took this magnificent eagle to the rotunda yesterday. We had a few minutes. You can imagine the commotion that it created, but it was one of joy and appreciation for all of those wonderful citizens that are in the rotunda to see our nation's symbol alive and well. And that's why the Peregrine Fund is so important. So they're not lobbyists. I'm not a lobbyist. And so if you need anyone that can, at some of your hearings, here's some good people, experts with a proven track record. And we're looking to find other opportunities that we can continue to build on what's already taking place.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Secretary.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you all for being here. Just introduce the rest of your people that are here, if you would.
No doubt. We have Paul Juergens here. Paul is our Vice President of Conservation for Domestic Programs. We have Dr. Chris McClure, who's our Executive Vice President of Conservation and Science. And we have Heather Muehlman, who's our Vice President of Development. And of course, our board.
Thank you all. And as we talked in when I was out there this fall, this is something that needs to be done, and I am fascinated by the fact that you don't litigate. You try to solve these by working with people to decide. Because I don't think anybody wants to see a species go extinct. They want to recover them. And if there's a way to work with people, that's the best way to do it. So I appreciate you being here today. Thank you for taking a few minutes and come down here. I understand you're going up to the Resources Committee, and then you'll be in my office tomorrow, and the secretary's going to be there. So, and if Zinke wants to come, hell, we'll have 3 secretaries there, and I'll just be the toad that invited everybody. Thank you all. You bet. And if you don't know, this bird actually came from Michigan. They brought it down from Michigan.
That was fun.
Hmm?
That was fun.
Yeah. It's just neat to see something like that close up, and, you know, see that beak that comes over and you go, that'd hurt, you know, those talons. Oh. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate you giving us the time to do that, and I'm sure during a budget hearing you don't mind yielding that time. Good morning, and thank you to Chief Moore for joining us here on Capitol Hill to discuss the Forest Service fiscal year 2024 budget request. I'm pleased to return as chairman of the Interior Subcommittee to have the opportunity to address the critical issues and needs of the U.S. Forest Service. As a Western member of Congress, fire is far too familiar to the communities in my home state of Idaho and across the West. I genuinely enjoy the Forest Service employees in our region and value their important work. They are consistently doing the best job that they can do with the funding and the laws we enact from thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C. It's safe to say Forest Service employees are not in it for the money. They join the Forest Service for their love of the outdoors and want to do their part to conserve and protect it. Chief Moore, I know your time as Pacific Southwest Region Forester for almost 15 years gave you invaluable insight into the mega fires that impact our national forest year after year. With 2 years under your belt as chief, I look forward to hearing your perspectives on the Forest Service planned investments and how these reasonably build on the funding Congress provided in the 2023 appropriations, as well as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. It would be beneficial to discuss the Forest Service plans for implementing these additional sources of funding which provided billions of additional dollars for the Forest Service. Over the coming years, this subcommittee intends to actively oversee the spending of the IIJA and the IRA funds to ensure value for the taxpayers and our national resources are without waste, fraud, and abuse. For 2024, the President's request asked for $7.43 billion for the Forest Service, an increase of $2.57 billion above the fiscal year 2023 enacted level. That's a 53% increase. While critical investments for the Forest Service are necessary to protect and manage our nation's forests and support our wildland firefighters, I have serious concerns about the scale of increases proposed in the President's budget. We are living at a time of record deficits and debt. The Republican Conference and the Appropriations Committee have committed to taking meaningful steps to help put our country's fiscal house in order. Like all Americans, the federal government must live within its means, and doing so will require us to make difficult choices and discern wants from actual needs. I'm glad to see the Forest Service budget prioritize compensation for wildland firefighters, wildland fire risk management, and access to all resources on our public lands. Our nation's wildland firefighters safeguard vital benefits for the communities across the nation. Firefighters protect our nation's critical infrastructure, defend lives and private property from the risk of catastrophic wildfire, preserve forests so that they can better mitigate wildfire risks, and protect landscapes that contain cultural and natural resources of significant value to tribes. As many of my colleagues may know, the Forest Service competes with states to hire and maintain federal firefighting forces. In the past, the Forest Service and many of the fire-prone states have not been able to offer competitive pay, so I am pleased the administration is proactively working to address these gaps. The request prioritizes the wildland fire management workforce with $180 million for permanent firefighting pay reform and $50 million for firefighter housing needs and $10 million towards a joint effort with the Department of Interior for mental health and well-being programs. While these efforts are noble and warranted, the Forest Service does not have the authority to implement any of the proposed workforce changes without the help of Congress, so I look forward to discussing that with you. Additionally, I was pleased to see that wildland fire payment continues to be a top priority for the agency in 2024. The proposal for almost $3 billion of these activities will allow the Forest Service to focus critical investments on hazardous fuels treatment and support the objectives of the agency's 10-year strategy to confront the nation's wildfire crisis. The state fire and volunteer fire capacity grants, forest products, as well as grazing management activities are critical to my home state of Idaho. While I noticed some reductions to some of these programs, I look forward to working with my colleagues to ensure that these receive the attention and resources they deserve. Chief Moore, thank you again for joining us this morning. Your leadership of the Forest Service is vital to our environment and communities across the country. I look forward to our discussion and working with you. Now I'd like to yield to Ranking Member Pingree for her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much for bringing the special guest in this morning. That was a wonderful opportunity. Chief Moore, so nice to have you with us this morning, and thank you for your leadership. We're pleased to talk with you today and hear your thoughts on the fiscal 2024 budget request for the Forest Service. I'm very pleased to see that this budget request builds on the historic investments made in the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act to improve the resilience of landscapes, reduce wildfire risks, and conduct reforestation of impacted landscapes. And I am very supportive of the administration's commitment to supporting wildland firefighters and their families through better compensation, safe housing, and by providing the health and well-being assistance. Through the bipartisan infrastructure law, Congress provided $600 million to support federal wildland firefighters and to ensure they receive a minimum of $15 per hour. Your budget continues and expands these pay reforms to provide equitable, competitive compensation. This is essential to improving firefighter recruitment and retention, and I support your efforts. The budget also includes investments for climate science and the promotion of healthy forests. Combating climate change and protecting communities from the threat of wildfire go hand in hand.
Thank you.
Healthy forests are a crucial part of our fight against climate change through long-term carbon sequestration. Yet one of the biggest obstacles is the increase of high-intensity wildfires, which are affecting our landscapes. So I'm interested to hear from you today about how your proposed investments in activities like hazardous fuel reduction and burned area rehabilitation fit into the Forest Service 10-year wildfire crisis strategy to benefit forest health. I look forward to discussing the impact these investments will have and where any gaps in our response may still remain. Thank you so much for being with us today. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Pingree. With that, Chief Moore, you may proceed with your opening statement. Your official submitted testimony will be included in the record.
Thank you, Chair Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting me to testify before you today. I appreciate the opportunity to share how the Forest Service is putting America's money to work. The fiscal year 2024 request focuses on three primary areas: modernizing the wildland fire management system, confronting the wildfire crisis, and ensuring equitable access to and benefits from the National Forest System. The people we serve deserve nothing less than to see the value of their money at work for their benefit. National forests and grasslands cover about 193 million acres, some 180 million people, and over 68,000 communities rely on these lands to capture and filter drinking water. Our work contributes to over 373,000 jobs, $40.3 billion to the GDP, and we work with tribes, states, and local governments, private landowners, and many other partners across the country to keep forests and grasslands healthy and safe. Today, America's forests face dire threats from wildfire, climate change, insects and disease, and particularly in the West. This is an emergency situation that we have in many places, and we're acting with a sense of urgency and collaboration with communities and with our partners. Our top priority, of course, is to reduce wildfire threats by safeguarding communities and critical infrastructure that these communities depend on, as well as creating healthy and resilient forests. Through our wildfire crisis strategy, we've revamped and ramped up to treat the right places at the right scale using an all-hands, all-lands approach. This past January, we announced investments of $930 million in 21 high-risk landscapes in the West, benefiting roughly 200 communities and many other resources that people value. Earlier this week, we announced nearly $200 million in community wildfire defense grants towards 100 projects in 22 states and 7 tribes, including one for fuel breaks in Clark County, Idaho. Recent investment by Congress gives us a historic opportunity to take bold and strategic action. We're working to do just that, to put every dollar to good use. We're grateful to Congress, this committee in particular, for investing foundational funding to do this work. Sustained execution depends on continued federal investments. The proposed FY24 budget responds to this need. This budget also calls for a $1.4 billion investment in salaries, health, safety, and well-being for firefighters. A suite of new actions will permanently increase pay. It will improve options for housing and provide better care and support for physical and mental health. It also increases the number of firefighters. While firefighters represent the backbone of our wildfire system, we also need to actively and aggressively land manage in order to confront the wildfire crisis. This budget invests $300 million in hazardous fuel treatments. It supports execution of the wildfire crisis strategy, and it targets investments in burn area rehabilitation. In fact, $56 million have been put there to expedite the recovery of wildfire. It supports the use of the latest research, including grants to universities to support the educational and technical assistance for innovative wood products. National forests and grasslands in general belongs to every American. We're grateful for the Great American Outdoor Act. It has given us the ability to look at reducing $7.7 billion of our maintenance backlog, which ensures public access. Every person should feel a personal invitation and connection to these lands. We remain committed to removing barriers so all people can enjoy National Forest System lands and services, particularly tribal and underserved communities. We continue to focus policies, accountabilities, and training to ensure an equitable, respectful, and harassment-free work environment for all of our employees. We know what's at stake if we don't address the effects of climate change and the wildfire crisis, the health of our forests and communities, clean water, vibrant wood product industry, and jobs and resources that Americans depend on. We need to act now to meet the challenges before us. Thank you, and I am grateful for your support, and I welcome any questions that you all may have.
Thank you. I appreciate your opening statement. Chief Moore, as you know, Idaho is, first a couple of local parochial questions. As you know, Idaho is rich in critical minerals, and it is vitally important we get these minerals out of the ground in Idaho and around the country. There's a mine in Idaho that was developed during World War II to provide antimony for war purposes, and it's been sitting abandoned in the mountains of Idaho. There's a company that wants to come in to restore the mine, clean the site up. However, it's taken them far too long to get licensed. The Stibnite Gold Project in Idaho is the largest antimony reserve outside of China and Russian control. And yet we continue to be far too reliant on countries that hate us for critical minerals. In October of 2022, the Forest Service released its supplemental draft environmental impact statement on the project, choosing the company's plan as their preferred alternative. And once fully approved, it would be the only source of antimony mined in the United States. I have brought this mine up with multiple agencies and just heard and just about anybody that would listen. Given the Forest Service is the lead federal agency on this project, I ask for your commitment to keep this project on track and on schedule. Do you have any updates on this? I'd be happy to hear them.
I do, and thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. You know, it's important to note also that the reason for the supplemental draft to EIS was because the mine operator had made significant changes to the plan of operation. And so we were required to do a supplemental EIS because of that. So where we are in terms of the next step is that the FEIS, which is the final EIS, as well as the draft record of decision, is projected for December of this year. And then the decision, including the beginning of the objection period, is projected for the spring of 2024. So right now, we are projected to have that ready by the spring of 2024.
I appreciate those comments, and I will tell you that the Forest Service people that have been working out there on this project have been great to work with. So appreciate that. The Forest Service has been working with Idaho to develop a multi-purpose, non-motorized public trail between Stanley, Idaho, and the Redfish Recreation Complex. The Redfish Stanley Trail has been in the works for almost as long as I've been a member of Congress. I look forward to this project's completion. Can you confirm that this project, and I know that we've had legal issues in the last year or so with the contractor and stuff, but can you confirm this project is slated to be completed this year, and are there any updates on the possible completion date that you can speak to?
Yes, sir. So as soon as the snow is off the ground, work will commence.
That might be June or July or August, the way things are going.
That's Mother Nature there.
Yeah, it is.
But the plan is to have it operational and open to the public in August of this year.
Great. Well, thank you I appreciate that. Ms. Pingree?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to yield my time right now to Mr. Kilmer, who has 2 other hearings he needs to be in, and I'll be here for the duration. So go ahead, Mr. Kilmer.
Mr. Kilmer?
All right, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the ranking member. Thanks, Chief, for being here. I do this every year, and you are a good person. You have great people in our region, and at the Olympic National Forest, but I am just at a loss. I represent an area that used to be very timber dependent. Saw a lot of my friends' parents lose their jobs. A lot of my neighbors lose their jobs because of decline in harvest levels. And every year I come to this hearing and I just plea with you and I plea with your predecessors because in our region and on the Olympic, we are just failing. We're failing to produce meaningful harvest levels, not just to support timber-dependent communities, but to support forest health. I sent a bipartisan letter with 20 of my colleagues to you earlier this year asking how the Forest Service will prioritize increasing active forest management for a healthier ecosystem and for sustainable timber outputs. We have not heard back. We were told by the region that there would be what they called a tactical pause to try to do planning. So instead of the historic goal of 20 million board feet, they set a target of 10 million board feet. The actual last year was 3. And so the consequence of this is there's a bunch that's not getting done. There's not road maintenance, which is important for recreation, for timber harvest, and for conservation. We have a long list of partners that have restoration opportunities that are getting delayed by staffing capacity or being deemed low priority or that are being stuck in permitting hell. And I come here every year, and like every year I just sort of plea with the Forest Service and say, what do you need? So like we've worked to fix fire borrowing, and we've increased appropriations to the agency, and we passed an infrastructure law and an Inflation Reduction Act and plowing more resources in. And yet, as I look at things in my region, we have an awesome forest collaborative with conservation community folks and timber industry folks. And for the life of me, I don't understand why they wouldn't just take a walk, because we are not getting the support from the service that we need. And I am at a loss. So one, I'm pleading for your help, but two, I want to ask, one, how are you working through the new 3+1 strategy to ramp up the ability to do larger scale management programs and increase timber harvest? 2, what are the plans to solve some of the capacity issues and address the backlog of vacant positions in our region? What are you doing to increase partnerships and to improve the contracting process? We've recently heard you're also working on establishing keystone agreements to help with these capacity issues. How is that process going? What are you doing to address the maintenance backlog on the ONF that's impacting recreation and harvest and conservation projects? And what is the plan so that I'm not back here next year? I don't want to bang on you, and I don't want to bang on your team in the region or on our forest, but it is just so disappointing that we are just failing the communities I represent.
So thank you for the question. And it was really a loaded question because I could cover the entire agency's operation by answering that question. So let me try and start nationally, and then I'll work down to the Olympic National Forest where you are. So looking nationally, we have set a target of about 3.4 billion board feet this year. And that's an increase from just 3 billion board feet just last year. We also, within the next 5 years, have set a target of 4 billion board feet, and we're dependent on implementing the wildfire crisis strategy to help us get there. We have also looked at doing a lot of our work through partners and collaboratives, which you mentioned. But in order to do a lot of this work through our partners, we also know that we needed to fix the infrastructure for which we operate on. And that meant looking at our contracting policies, that meant looking at our grants and agreements policy to make it easier for partners to work with us since we're going to be so dependent. You mentioned the Keystone partnerships. We do. We have National Forest Foundation. We're looking at up to about $240 million with them. The Mule Deer Foundation is about $50 million. And also we have about $50 million that we work with the National Wild Turkey Federation. So these are some of our keystone partners, and we're looking to even expand that even more with other partners. And so we've had to really look at our infrastructure and just how we do business. And so we spent much of this year changing how we operate internally, looking at policy shifts, policy changes in order to make that easier. Now, when I look at the actual targets themselves, we are increasing the accountability in this system. For the first time, I've given each of the regions a target to achieve. And so each region also have a target to achieve. I am meeting with all of my senior leadership team once a month. That's the accountability piece that's in the system. We want to talk about what are the challenges, what are the issues, and how can we address those issues in real time to keep things moving, because we have a lot at stake. That's our accountability to Congress, that you were generous enough to provide us with Bill and IRA as well as GAOA, and we want to redeem our responsibilities to Congress by holding ourselves accountable to achieve what we had said that we would achieve. Now, looking more specifically at the region, they had a 3+1 process, and basically what that was getting at is having 3 years of cell prep or pipeline kinds of things, plus 1 year. Now, what we want to do there as well is, you know, we've had a lot of fires, we had a lot of reasons for not being able to accomplish that. In fact, a lot of our timber sales that we had planned to sell, the fires burned through them and destroyed them. We have disease and insects that's spreading across the country that's also affecting them. And, you know, when we try and put up a sale, particularly with the disease and insects, you have a couple of years to try to get that sale done. Otherwise, blue stain sets in, and the quality of the wood is not as high. We also have some other challenges. Most of the material we have to look at getting at the wildfire crisis strategy are small diameter, low value material. And so another part of our strategy is to look at creating new industries with our wood innovation grants. Yeah. And so we've been providing wood innovation grants to look at things like cross-laminated timber. And cross-laminated timber has been really good. We have 6 plants across the country right now. We have about 1,600 buildings that are being built or being designed to be built across the country with CLT. In fact, one of the things that we're proud of to show that it has a lot of strength is that the tallest building in the world right now is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, using cross-laminated timber. I believe it's about 25 stories. So we're trying to create a new industry with the type of material that we have plenty of supply. We still have reason for saw logs. We still have reason for our traditional program, but we have so much material out there, we have to create new industries with some of the wood innovations. Now, looking specifically at your area there, you know, the Olympic National Forest, what I am told is that we're trying to provide a consistent and stable supply. And when we look at what the Olympic National Forest has to provide, is really restoration opportunities rather than a traditional timber program. If we look at it for restoration purposes for that forest and that type of ecosystem, what we have and what we think we can do on a consistent and stable basis is about 10 million board feet. I know that's not where the forest has been, but we know that, I'm being told that that is we can give that a stable, make that a stable type of an operation. Now, in order to do that, we've also provided them with some additional funding this year to actually achieve that. And so our expectation is that they will achieve 10 million board feet, and that we are looking at that to be a stable amount going forward.
I know I'm over my time, Chairman, but I'd love to follow up with you.
Sorry it took so long.
No, it's we need your help. This is we can't do this every year.
I'm interested in working with you, Congressman.
Okay, thanks.
I can set up additional time with you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Clouden?
Hello.
Good morning.
Thank you and welcome. I'm new to the committee, so it's great to be here with you and to talk to you about the work that you're doing and the good work that, you know, boots on the ground are doing throughout the. You mentioned university grants, and I was wondering, our staff had actually tried to find information on what grants are going to universities, and had a hard time finding that. We couldn't find it available online. I'm not saying it's not there. I'm just saying if it is, it's difficult to find. I was wondering if you could provide a list of all the grants that the Forest Service
Sure,
has
we'd be
given
happy
out
to
in
do
the
that.
last couple fiscal years or so.
Yeah, we'll follow up for sure.
Okay, that'd be great. Wanted to go to roads because you know a number of the budget is plus up, but that's one that's noted to decrease, which is concerning to me. As my colleague just mentioned, there's some backlog work there. I know in Texas, in the Sam Houston National Forest in Walker County, there's some neighborhoods there who need access because of the roads. They can't get their mail delivered because the roads go through the forest property. They've signed a cooperative agreement, but the Forest Service, they keep telling us, is unresponsive. And so they're having a hard time with what they're dealing with and getting answers to that. And so to hear from that and then to find out that we're going to minus the roads and then plus up some of these areas that are less tangible, I should say, that's of concern to me. So first of all, is the Forest Service back to 100% not teleworking? Is everybody back in where they're supposed to be?
So, Carlos, we've never been at 100% telework. It depends on what part of the agency you were in and whether that was remote work or telework. Most of our employees who work on the ground has never really teleworked. They've always worked out in the field.
They were kind of social distanced anyway. No.
Yeah, well, where we were at, and we all struggled even as a country when the pandemic first hit. And so we were really trying to find a way to operate during the pandemic. And, what I would say is that the unsung heroes are recreation technicians who were out there with our publics. The publics only agreed to stay indoors for a while. And they began to go and visit a lot of our recreation sites. In fact, we had record number of visitors visiting our recreation sites. And our recreation technicians and recreation folks was on the front line of a lot of sometimes angry publics. And so that's part of the unsung heroes in all of this. And we talk about our firefighters for good reason, but we have so many other employees within the agency that are on the front lines. Now, as you leave the forest district and the forest and you move up into the regional office, that's where you begin to see more telework, more remote work. And when you get to the Washington office level, then that's true. But one of the things that we found during this pandemic is that there's more than...
I have a number of things to go through
Okay.
in limited time. So they're still teleworking is my question, or they're not?
Oh, yes, teleworking is still an option for many people.
For many people,
Many.
okay. Productivity seems to go down. I've found this from agency to agency to agency. The response, we deal with casework every single day in our office, and it's a notable decline over the last couple of years in response rates and those kind of things. And I would encourage everyone to get back to work. as
Our
possible. But
productivity, sir, just for your information, has not gone down. In fact, it has gone up.
Okay. Can you address why the decrease in roads?
Well, it's the budget. Looking at the FY24 budget, we're going to still be able to do a lot of significant work with this proposed budget. I will always be concerned that we don't have enough money to do all the work that needs to be done out there. I look at the storms that have passed across the West recently, particularly in California, where we have significant road damage. And I'm concerned about our ability to do the work necessary to open up access back to the forest, but also into communities where these roads lead to.
I would note that in your budget, one of the, actually the highest percent in this little, at least this part that we're looking at here, 70% change increase in other accounts. That's pretty vague. What's that?
Well, it's things like recreation facilities. It's things, if you're going to put up a timber sale as an example, we need to do archaeological surveys, wildlife surveys. There's a lot of other things that we do that traditionally has not been funded as well. And as we look at implementing the wildfire crisis strategy, we have to look at the entire budget if we're going to have all of this working in sync with each other.
Okay. And I have one more question. I don't know where the clock is. So. Okay, I'm sorry. By my calculation, we're spending about $5,000 an acre managing our forest, which seems like a lot. I realize I'm not schooled in this like you, so I'm not assuming it. How much of that is DC office? How much of that is these other regional offices? How much of that is boots on the ground, firefighters, people working in the forest, people helping people get access to the forest? building these recreation facilities and such.
Yeah, so Congressman, I'm not sure how you come up with that number and what all it involves or what all it includes. If I look at the work that we actually do on the ground, it's much less than that on a per acre basis. If I look at how the forest is budgeted, particularly on those resource-related areas, on average, we're doing about $1,200 per acre. That varies depending on the location in the country. It could go as high as $5,000 in some of those locations, like Lake.
How did you get 1,200? Because, basically, I took the budget and divided by millions of acres. So, if there's a $1,200 figure and you take I'm trying to figure out how much
Yeah.
of this is overhead and how much of this is boots on the ground working.
I think you've oversimplified that.
I'm sure I have.
Because all of that doesn't go into a per acre cost unless you're wanting to make a point about how much money we get, and you just multiply it across the acres, but that money is not intended to go on improving acres or doing work out on the ground. So if we separated it out and look at the money that's really allocated to do work on the ground, it's much, much less than that. Although, depending on where you are, cases like Lake Tahoe at times can be $5,000 per acre because of the restrictions, that we have in certain parts of the country. But there's also other parts of the country where we can get the work done for $800. So on average, we're looking anywhere between $1,200 to about $1,800 per acre.
Okay. And I'll just say, I'm coming to this conversation, I admit, this is my first hearing, and so I'm coming with no assumptions. I'm trying to get an understanding, basically, of where the breakdown is, where the workforce, I think, how many employees you said? There's 30,000?
Yeah, 31,000.
31,000 is what I thought. And how much of that is firefighters? How much of that is park managers? Or, how much
Yeah,
of that
right,
is DC
right.
office? How much of that? And if I could get a breakdown of that, that'd be very helpful.
Be
I'm
happy to
just
give you that,
Trying
sir.
to understand.
Sure.
Get a better overarching view of the Forest Service. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Be happy to provide that.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. Ms. Pingree?
Thank you so much. It's great to have you here today, and thank you for your answers to our questions. I have a couple programs I want to talk about, but I want to just start with the budget here. So last week, in a response to a request from our committee, Secretary Vilsack provided a letter that highlighted some of the difficult cuts that would occur at the USDA if we were to return to fiscal year 2022 funding levels. That's been one of the things that's been talked about as we proceed in this budgeting process. So it's certainly my hope we're not going to go there, but I would like to have you highlight some of the challenges you would face if we were returned to fiscal year 2022 levels, just so I can better understand the detail of what that would look like.
So I have my preference, but we have to do a lot of discussions about where those budgets would come from. But based on where I am right now, if we look at the intent behind the FY24 budget, what we're trying to do is make right to the organization. And if I take firefighters as an example, we're doing a number of things that is really critical for firefighters. Not only the pay increase to make it equitable to non-federal firefighters, but we're also looking at things like portal to portal, where we pay other entities to come and help us fight fires. We just want to do the same thing for our employees. We're looking at mental health and well-being. We're looking at the housing issue there. And so when we look at those types of things, those are the right things to do by our employees that work so hard. Now, if we were to have a budget cut in those areas, what we would have to do is reduce the number of firefighters, but provide them with the same benefits that I just mentioned. Because there has to be a correlation. We have to treat our employees like we value them. And so whether we cut 2,000 firefighters, or whether we cut 1,000 firefighters or 3,000 firefighters, we want the firefighters we have to have those same benefits that I mentioned there that this FY24 budget provides. And the same would go for implementing the wildfire crisis strategy, where we have a lot of our resource-related positions that are really getting at protecting communities and saving lives. That would be reduced as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I really do appreciate it. I know the chair mentioned it earlier, and I said it in my opening remarks. The understanding that we have to have our federal firefighters on par with, local and other communities, and make sure that we're providing all that support, both in wages, but also, as you said, housing and mental health issues, whatever it is. We increasingly understand how valuable this force is to us. So one program I wanted to talk about is agroforestry, which we don't always get to in this committee, but I'm lucky enough to be on ag and this committee, so, and here we are. Well, that, as many people may not know, it's an intentional integration of trees or shrubs with crop and animal production. And there's a growing interest in agroforestry to help mitigate the effects of climate change, sequester more carbon in the soil. So I was pleased to see the announcement of 2 USDA Partnership for Climate Smart Agriculture commodity grants that will advance agroforestry. I anticipate a growing number of producers will be seeking technical assistance and more information. In the omnibus, I was proud to help secure $2 million for the National Agroforestry Center. So could you talk a little bit about what initiatives the Forest Service is working on in the area of agroforestry, and how can we accelerate some of those practices?
Yes, and by the way, thank you for all of your work in that area. It is one of the unsung heroes in what we're trying to do. So under the Secretary of Vilsack's direction, USDA is trying to operate as one USDA. And to reflect that, we're going to be entering into a partnership with the Natural Resource Conservation Service to produce and promote a lot of the agriculture-related technologies, training, and educational material to reach the agroforestry producers in a way that we're going to be ensuring value to them. So that's just one of the components that we're planning to do at the direction of Secretary Vilsack.
Great. Well, I'm going to run out of time, but I have more questions for the next round. So thank you so much, and thanks for talking about that.
Thank you for that answer. I'm not going to bring up whether it ought to be one land management agency with the BLM and other land. We talked about several years ago when Norm Dix was chairman of this committee about moving the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Forestry over to the Department of Interior. We didn't get a very good reception, not from anybody. So I'm not going to bring that up, not even going to talk about it. Mr. Hamady.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief, so gone are the good old days when I used to come down to Alameda to see you in Admiral Rickover's old office building and tell you that the forest supervisor at Humboldt, Toyabe, told me to say hi to you, and that people couldn't pass the Forest Service entrance exam to work at Humboldt. Toyabe ended up in the Pacific Southwest Regional Office. I want to put on the record, though, that you took it very well, and your staff, after being momentarily stunned, took it equally as well. So it's nice to see you. Just a couple of things that I want to follow up on. First, one of the things that we're finding, not to try to combine everything under one umbrella, if you will, is that at least in Interior and in the Bureau of Land Management, when you look at staffing, not just fire, but all staffing, that they're running at about 60–70% on average, at least in the 6 district offices in Nevada. And so we are being told that part of that is compensation. And for the lower levels, GS 6, 7, 8, 9, where they're being asked to live, you quite simply can't afford to take the job, even if they want it, because you can't rent, you can't buy, you can't whatever. At the same time that we're being told that in the Park Service, those folks have housing with their deal, which was news to me. It looks like it's news to you too, but maybe it isn't. And so you're sitting there going, well, I get nobody gets all the resources they want, but it's like, hey, if this is an institutional thing where we are, and I think it's beginning to look that way, chronically open on staff positions which nobody can afford to take, I think that's something we need to talk about to say from an appropriation standpoint, well, what's the answer there? Just having positions on the book at the lower end that nobody will ever take isn't solving anybody's problem. So I'd like to follow up with that. The second thing is I'd really like to follow up, and you know from your history because you were over the Tahoe Basin Management Unit. After the recent fire realities there, we've had the opportunity to go take a big look at what the infrastructure there is for delivering water for fire suppression. And so as you go and you look through pump stations and tanks and all the stuff that goes into that, this committee forwarded some stuff last time that talks about, hey, for infrastructure type stuff, Forest Service can spend up to $10 million. And so we recently followed up, and they're not Nevada, I mean, yeah. South Tahoe Public Utility District is one of them. I love the acronym, STUPID. I can relate to that. That's why I'm like, hey, I got to do that issue for stupid. But anyhow, they've got their allotment or allocation or whatever from Forest Service says, hey, you got 2.5 million. And so my question is, for follow-up is, so what is the process that the Forest Service uses with a $10 million up to authorization to go, it's 2.5 million, and here you go. So it's like, well, okay, I'm not saying because you had 10, you're supposed to do 10, but I'd like to have some confidence, and I don't know, so it's not like I'd like to have some confidence in that number reflects good, solid consideration, weighing whatever the value judgments are, and going with that. So, those are the things which would be best left for, although you got an aviation guy as your budget stuff? But at least he was an Army guy. That's good. We'll look forward to the talk. But anyhow, with that in mind, any thoughts just off the top of your head, especially on that allocation of up to 10 million and here's 2.5?
Yeah, you said a lot, and you hit on the crux of a lot of concerns that we would have internally as well. And you started talking about the whole housing for all employees, and we talk about the housing issue for firefighters, but a lot of other employees will also benefit from that. In terms of recruiting to go into some of our locations, it is becoming more of a concern. And I'll give you an example. Last year we hired 3,500 people, but we lost 2,700 through attrition and other reasons. And so out of all of that hiring, we were only able to net about 800 people in terms of capacity. When we look at some of our locations across the country, and it's across the country, more and more of our communities are beginning to be really expensive, particularly at the lower end of the grade scale. So anything less than a GS5 is really, you're asking them to really work at the lower end. And depending on where you are, that's not enough to even pay for rent. And so it's a real concern that we have across the agency, and it's something that we all need to spend a bit more time on in terms of how do we address what's happening in our country right now. We
can probably start with, what are you doing now? I know some agencies are saying, hey, we're buying rooms in the hotel for seasonal people. Not that that's a solution, but anyhow, probably a good place to start is, here's what we're doing now from something to nothing. Anyhow, go ahead.
And we can and we are doing a little of that, not a lot, where we would, Forest Service would purchase or rent a facility, and then particularly when we have employees coming on detail, that they pay a percentage of their salary toward that living conditions. So we just don't have the funding to do a lot of that, particularly the more we move into more of this century. We have locations, sir, that we are being forced to consider, do we have enough presence there to continue to stay in the community?
Yeah.
And as we look at that journey level of employee who has a family, they're concerned about schools, they're concerned about housing, they're concerned about a lot of things. And I don't know if this is just what the Forest Service is facing or if this is what our country is facing in terms of the labor workforce right now.
We'll look forward to following up with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harder.
Thank you. I'd like to start by just vigorously seconding Mr. Amadei's point on the workforce issues. I know in California, CAL FIRE starts out their folks at $70,000 a year. The Forest Service starts at $20,000 a year, and it's a pretty hard argument to be making that you can that you can take folks. And so generally the only folks you're going to get are people that like the benefits or don't work out for one reason or another for CAL FIRE. So I'd love to work with you, Mr. Amadei, on a solution there because we desperately need it. I wanted to start by talking about the hazardous fuels reduction. I remember the discussion that we had around the infrastructure bill, and we were excited to get more support for that. I think we were able to, you were able to get about 3.2 million acres treated last year. This year you're looking at about 4.2 million with this budget request. But that's still a fraction of what we need. I remember last year hearing as much as 10 times we could have the capacity to do actually 10 times more acres. We have the need to do 10 times more acres of fuel management. Is that accurate? Where does this leave us now, even with this budget request, in terms of what's still remaining that is left untreated, that is still at pretty significant fire risk?
So looking at the wildfire crisis strategy, we said we wanted to do two things. One, we needed to treat 20 million acres of Forest Service managed land, but we also needed to treat 30 million acres of other federal, tribal, and private lands. And so what we've done in the crisis strategy is that we mapped fire sheds all across the country, but particularly let me just stick to the West right now. And in the West, a fire shed is about 250,000 acres. We have about 250 fire sheds across the West that the wildfire crisis strategy is trying to respond to. Looking at the FY24 budget, we're able to move into about 134 of those 250 fire sheds. And when you look at our ability to do that, you would have to ask, and we do, so how many communities are you going to protect with that? You know, it's one thing to talk about fire sheds, but what about municipal watersheds? What about communities? In that 130, we're going to be looking at trying to have a positive effect on about 200 different communities throughout the West. So that's our goal. I think that the FY24 President's budget moves us a long ways in trying to achieve that goal. In doing so, we're doing a number of things, which I mentioned earlier. We are also creating new industries with innovations. You know, I talked about CLT. We talked about biochar. We talked about some of those things that is emerging in our country, and we're trying to lean into those things that's emerging here in the country. And so we are pretty pleased with the FY24 budget. It doesn't do everything, but it sure does a whole lot more than what we've been able to do in the past.
But Chief, even with this budget, is it accurate to say that there's still, you know, in California, you have about 20 million acres of Forest Service land just in California, and of course this works for the whole West, that there's still many times this number of acres that are left untreated that should be, you know, high priority or maybe medium priority because they didn't quite make the list. Even if this is achieved, isn't there still a lot of unmet demand on hazardous fuel reduction?
Yeah, there will always be that, you know, but let me point out though, our scientists are telling us that when you go into an area, let's just stick with the fire sheds, if you will. In order to have a positive outcome on how fire behaves in a fire shed, you need to treat between 20 and 40% of that fire shed. And so even though in California you may be talking about 20 million acres, but don't forget the way California is designed, you know, we're working with the state and other private landowners there. So it's not just the 20 million acres, you know, it's how do we have an effect on the 100 million acres that you have there. And in order to do that, the governor's task force is really doing a really good job of looking at an integrated approach, bringing federal, state, private, nonprofits, everyone into the equation. And so we feel that right now that's really one of the better approaches to take to try to get at landscapes regardless of jurisdictional boundaries, because that's how you're going to have a positive outcome on how fire behaves and moves.
Thank you. One last question. Given the constant challenges of workforce, given the unmet demand for hazardous fuels reduction, it feels like technology needs to be a much bigger piece going forward of the Forest Service plan. You know, drones for fire suppression, satellites for surveillance. I don't see, I know I saw this, you know, IT capabilities, but that seemed like a little bit of a different piece. What does the innovation budget for the Forest Service look like, and what are the opportunities that you see to expand that?
So what we are doing, and you mentioned it here, we are moving more into the era of drones. In fact, we have about 100 employees right now that's certified and qualified to operate drones. When I look at trying to introduce more prescribed burning into the ecosystem, we're looking at the southern region as an example where they do over 1 million acres a year in there. So we're looking at drones replacing helicopters for prescribed burning. What we're also seeing too, though, is that we have a really good use for drones to do resource monitoring. And so we want to experiment with that as well, so that when it rains, as an example, you don't have to worry about actually physically going out. We also have agreements set up with the Department of Defense to look at how we might use satellites, particularly during fire activities. So we are using technology in a much bigger way. We also are moving away from having fire towers out to look for fires out across the landscape and looking at setting up a camera system that can detect smoke from long distances. So we are moving in that direction, Congressman, and we realize that we need to lean much further into the technology arena.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, Chief, welcome. And I hope you understand and will forgive those of us who are bouncing. We've got other, I wish I could have been here, but I think I've reviewed your comments, and I appreciate something that you mentioned, which I'm going to mention in just a moment. If you were to look at a map of Utah and my district, it would look like I have about half the state. It's not quite, but it's close. I have downtown Salt Lake City, but I have very rural and very beautiful parts of the state. And obviously, federal government, federal lands, and Forest Service is a big part of that. One group that we work very closely with are our sheriffs, which law enforcement in rural communities is quite different than law enforcement in Washington, D.C., or again in Salt Lake City. And we've always had a great relationship between the local sheriffs and the federal government, federal agencies, through the cooperative law enforcement contracts. We've seen less of that recently. We think there's real advantages in having those. Obviously, it's a bit of a financial benefit to the local sheriffs, many of which are in very, very rural counties that don't have much money, a very small tax base. I mean, some of these rural counties have a few thousand people that live in them. But that's not the primary reason I'm interested in. The primary reason is I feel like it benefits the community and law enforcement generally for them to have these contracts. Wondering if you would respond to that, whether you feel like there's more resources we could make available, and whether you agree that it actually is a good solution to a problem.
Okay, thank you. So I'm a firm believer in the cooperative law agreements. In fact, I've worked out there enough to see the value in those agreements, where we have the local sheriff department helping to patrol a lot of the national forest system's land, but also to respond to some of the concerns, that happens on the weekends or in the evenings. And it's something that I think we should all be proud of, how law enforcement community is really working together to try and do the work that's needed, regardless of like I was saying earlier, the boundaries. So I'm a firm believer in that program, and I do think that it needs to be much more than what it currently is. And so we've been trying to make some shifts where we can, based on the budgets that we currently have. One of the problems and the biggest concern what we have right now is that same budget line item is in law enforcement's budget. That same budget has to do the must-haves, like the cameras that our law enforcement personnel needs to have in the equipment. And so in addition to the must-haves, then what's left or what's balanced is the co-op agreements with a lot of our local sheriff departments. But I will submit to you that that is a very important program. Is one that we should all be proud of, how the law enforcement community is working together to try and get a lot of this work done. It's just not enough.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate, and please, let's work together to try to increase some of this funding. And if I could, just two more comments on this. Number one is, there's a reason why local sheriffs are elected, because they are accountable to the people. The sheriffs know the people many times. And we've seen incidences, and I'm sure, Chief, you're aware of some instances where there was some conflict that was unnecessary. And I think primarily it was because the federal agency, law enforcement, just didn't have the training, and they didn't have the same background and relationships there. So I think that cooperation is actually very important, and we appreciate your support of that. The last thing, and I'm just going to mention this because it's way beyond what we could discuss here, and more than that, it's probably the answer still remains vague. But we want to work with you, and that's this, the idea in the western forest, the small diameter trees being declared not having any commercial value, and therefore we can't, find commercial businesses that are willing to try to take that to market. I'm stumped by that for a couple reasons. If I'm standing in the middle of Sequoia National Forest, and then you compare it, yeah, that's a small diameter tree, but these are obviously, and by the way, I've gone out and cut them for firewood. This is beautiful timber, yeah. and really has, it seems to me, I can't imagine it not having commercial value, but we've got this impediment to doing that. Again, it's more than we can discuss here in the time that I have, but if we can continue to work with you to find the market that would allow, and by the way, if you want to talk about healthy forests, if you want to talk about fire mitigation, allowing commercial access to this timber is a critical part of that.
Right. I'd be happy to follow with you. In fact, I look forward to it. I had mentioned earlier about the wood innovations, though, where we do hear comments like this. We're trying to create new innovations for wood use. So if a tree is small diameter, has low value, we still can make products out of it. We still can create economic opportunities for many of our small rural communities. And so we've been issuing grants even for mill owners that want to retrofit their mills to handle smaller material. And so we're doing a lot of that, trying to address a lot of the problems as they come up. But so far, we've been received really well on some of the grant opportunities for retrofitting the mills, and we're continuing to look at doing that. But I would love to follow up with you on some specifics there in Utah.
Thank you. We look forward to that. And Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zinke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chief. Good to see you guys again. You know, as Interior Secretary, I wanted the Forest Service in the worst way to crosswalk, but I was
well known,
unsuccessful.
Sir.
So I'm sure the Great American Outdoors Act has been very, very helpful. You know, my concern is that it was intended to really to make sure that it goes to infrastructure. And I believe housing was part of that infrastructure on that. But it seems as I review it, a lot of it's going to studies. So so if you just look at that and just I ask you to look at it and make sure that the focus was on getting things done and not doing analysis of how to get things done. And then in regards to forest fire, I'm sure you have the same frustrations. A lot of it is litigation. I've talked to the superintendents in Montana, and they want to do the right thing. They recognize the health of the forest. They recognize that we've created a new industrial complex called firefighting. Eisenhower talked about the military-industrial complex, and now we have a firefighting industrial complex. It's huge. We're spending $4 to $5 billion, plus the damage. It's in probably the $20 billion range when you talk about the damage, equipment, focus, and effort. And a lot of your attention now is on fighting fires rather than managing forests. The concern that I have is that you can make sure you have the tools to manage properly the forest. But in every case, they always talk about litigation. They're trying to do the right thing, but they're stacked up on 4 or 5 or sometimes 6 lawsuits by various people. Do you share that concern on the amount of litigation over what seems to be a very simple timber sale that's in line with a sustainable yield? There's plenty of studies out there. We know what it takes to have a healthy forest, but every time we enter a timber sale, there seems to be a lot of litigation.
Yeah. So, Congressman, as a public servant, I accept all of us and how we are as a country. And in this country, anyone can litigate us on anything. That's my reality as a public servant, and so I have to just deal with that. So my opinion doesn't mean a lot, particularly if it infringes on someone else's right. And so we're left to deal with that.
Let me shape it the other way rather than your opinion. Do you see that the speed of which you would like to manage the forest is to a degree has a cause and effect of the litigation?
Yeah, you know, I would love to be able to go out and do a lot of the things that we feel needs to take place. But you know, we have checks and balances in our system, and I'm okay with that. I'll give you an example. You know, I look at this wildfire crisis, and you mentioned in your opening comment that we're spending a lot of time fighting fires rather than managing the forest. And what we're trying to get at is the more we create health and resiliency in the forest, the less fires we're going to have.
100%.
But, you know, which comes first? Right now, we have an issue with unwanted fires across the landscape. And so we have no other choice but to deal with that issue. And on the other side of us, what we're trying to do is to create the health and resiliency in these ecosystems so that we can reduce the number of fires. And it's a tall order, and it's a big job. But that's our commitment to try and achieve that.
I'm sure this committee, and I don't mean to speak for the chairman, but we've talked many times. We want to work with you to make sure you have the tools necessary to go after it. And the goals are the same. This is not a particularly partisan committee. The goal is the same: healthy forests. But healthy forests, we've knocked out the timber, smaller companies, so they can't go in. And all of a sudden, the haul distance is so far, it becomes uneconomical, even for the micro industries that are emerging. So management of the forest entails a set amount of material So our smaller mills can make sure that their return on investment and make the right investment over the long period of time. And when the litigation happens, they're not being able to get a known throughput, thus those mills go away, and it creates another series of problems. So I would like you to look at in ways that we can be helpful, to have a strong dialogue, make sure, and also these mills, we have to guarantee them, to a degree, enough material so they can survive. And, you know, timber prices go up and down, but as soon as you knock a timber mill out, then it's a couple hundred miles to the next one, and then all of a sudden our forest, we don't have the mechanism other than prescribed burns to manage our timber. So I appreciate what you do, and you were very, very wise to bring on board Chuck Rhodey.
Yeah. I love that notion, too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Elsie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here. I am an aviator by trade. This is a part-time gig. But I've been flying my whole life, and I remember the first time I saw Always and the firefighting unit that was in that movie. And at time to time, before I figured out what I was going to do with my life, thought about being a fire service air tanker pilot. Are you, with the increase in fires across the country, and seemingly the importance of the air tanker unit, do y'all have what you need? Do you have the employees? Do you have the pilots? Do you have the tankers? Are they old? Are they new? Is there a good plan in place for going for the future? Because doing this job is very hard on those aircraft,
Yes.
and I understand exactly how hard that is. So I'm asking you, and this is my only question today, do you have what you need in the air service?
I think so. Through contracting, we have the opportunity to call when needed, but also exclusive use. So far, it's working. We'll have to see how that continues to work into the future.
Okay. If you had any pot of money that you could just go grab, and anything that you could do to improve your service, top 3 things on your mind, keep you up at night, if you could fix anything, what would they be?
Continuous and stable budget, particularly increases, and I think you hit on it, and I think that's where you're going. But we have a real problem out there in our nation's forests, and a lot of times when we look at just a landscape, and regardless of jurisdiction or boundary, that's a lot of different land ownerships there. And anytime there's a fire that destroys a large area, and particularly when you have private businesses that are dependent on that landscape, it has a devastating effect. And I think if we can get to the point where we can look at, if we make an investment here, we can avoid the cost here. And we did a cost avoidance analysis a while back, and what it demonstrated is that with a small investment, you can avoid huge costs from fires. And I would like to be able to look at more of that type of analysis to really justify the value in doing the work that we're doing now, because you avoid huge payoffs down the road. And it's whether we're talking about clean air, whether we're talking about carbon that's going into the atmosphere, whether you're talking about burning up, let's just say 100,000 acres of private land, that's probably $100 million. And so we have to look at the different values of that. And we've seen that, particularly with some of the large timber owners, where fires have burned through and destroyed some of those private lands. That's lost money. That's lost value. And we have to be able to come together to operate in a way that we can prevent a lot of what's happening. And so how do we talk about the value and of the investment to be made and what we save on this end? Now, we're exploring some of that now with conservation finance, ecosystem services. We are exploring that. Nothing is more frightening than when an insurance company drops a homeowner's insurance. But we're seeing that. How do we prevent that from happening to homeowners that happen to live in some of these areas that's susceptible to a high fire danger? We have a lot of work to do, and I would like to be able to look at a number of those things.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. I got a few comments and questions, I guess. I've been working for like 20 years with different chiefs, different administrations, whatever, on wildfire fighting and the air capacity that they had. I've always felt like the Forest Service should have at least a small fleet that they could use for initial attack and that type of stuff. And I realize we do, what, 90%, 95% through contract. But it changes every time there's a new administration, a new chief, on what they think they need and stuff. This committee cannot fund 10 new helicopters if that was if that was what you would need. And the former Chief Tidwell told me he'd take helicopters over anything else. What we need is a 10-year plan of what you would like in terms of air service that the Forest Service owns. Understanding it's going to be a very small percentage of the overall wildfire fighting thing, but so that we can plan on that in the budgets. And if we could get that and start that, I think we could do it through different administrations and different chiefs, if you know what I mean. Next, one of the other things, just a question. Why don't we fight wildfires at night? As you know, they blow up in the day, they calm down at night. And a lot of countries now, Australia particularly, is looking at nighttime wildfire fighting with air tankers and stuff.
We do fight fire at night. That's been a misconception for quite a while now. We didn't do it as much years back. And, there's generally a reason for everything, right? And the reason we stopped night flying is because of aircraft flying into each other.
Ooh, that's not good.
No, it's not. And but we have better technology now. We have night vision. We can see better. And so we had brought on a night flying aircraft down in Southern California to just kind of tiptoe back into that arena. And what we're looking at now is adding additional night flying helicopters, for example, up in the northern part of the state. We've also been working with some of the counties who also have that capability, whether it's, large cities, some of the counties have that. So we are exploring more and more of that, but we are doing night fighting of wildfires.
Good. Following up on what Mr. Zinke had to say, I agree with you fully that the public has a right to say in how their public lands are mandated. And it's not your fault that you spend all this money in lawsuits.
Right.
It's because of the process that we've created in Congress, whether it's with NEPA or any of the other things that allow you to challenge a suit or challenge a decision on almost every step of the way. And it's lawsuit after, same lawsuits go on and on forever. And right now we're having a lawsuit about fire retardant. I don't want to ask you about the particulars of the lawsuit. What would be the impact of if you lost this lawsuit and lost the ability to use fire retardant? I almost can't believe that.
So first of all, we are going to plan for whatever happens, and the law.
Do you have something to use in its place?
No, we have nothing currently to use in place of retardant. Water, perhaps. But we're in the process of working with the EPA to get a permit. That's going to take some time, though, perhaps 2 to 3 years. And so that's our approach right now, and we're waiting to see what happens in the courts.
Yeah, it is, if I'm a wildfire fighter and you're not using fire retardant, I'm out of there.
Well, it's a concern, for sure.
Yeah. I once asked, and this is just a comment, I once asked, I believe it was Chief Dombeck, so that was a long time ago. Tells you how long I've been here. I once asked him, I said, when you decided to do a timber sale, and all of the cost it takes to put that together, how much of the money that it cost is spent on what you believe to be a good, sound, scientific decision? And how much of it is spent on trying to make it bulletproof from a lawsuit? And he said, depending on the sale, he said between 25 and 50% is spent trying to make a good, sound, scientific decision on a timber sale. Between 50 and 75% is spent trying to make it bulletproof from a lawsuit. That was 20 years ago. I don't know if that same situation exists today. But somehow Congress has got to change the way we do NEPA and those other environmental laws, not to weaken them, not to take away the public's right to have a say in how things are managed. But when you can file a lawsuit with a stamp, we got a problem in this country. And so we need to make it make more sense and not cost so damn much money in court where we could spend that money actually managing the forests. And that's one of the frustrations I've had for 20 years. It's not your fault. It's our fault. And it doesn't apply just to the Forest Service. It applies to every land management agency, almost every agency in government. So I'm hopeful that we will take a look at that. It's a tough process to do because there are organizations that make a living off of lawsuits. And we've got to change that mentality in this country. And again, maintain people's rights to have a say in how things are managed and stuff. So I appreciate it. Ms. Pingree?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just got one more thing I want to talk about, but it's always such a treat for me to be in this particular hearing because the issues that all of you experience in the West are just so significantly different than what we have on the East Coast. Now, I come from the most forested state in the nation, so we care deeply about our forests, but they're not public lands, so it's just so different. And I know you know Maine in my region well. But one of the things that you've talked a lot about today, which I've enjoyed hearing about, is how the Wood Innovation Grants work and how some of this transition, which really applies to forest restoration in lands and some of the small diameter timber that people have been talking about, because as my state lost virtually almost all of our paper mills and really had to transition our wood products industry, we have benefited so much from the Wood Innovation Grants and really thinking about, as you talked about, cross-laminate timber. We have a facility about to come online that will be wood fiber insulation, so that's going to be significant, and that can use waste wood. Biochar, another opportunity. And I know we've been funding it. It's one of the things I'm really interested in. And I see that in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we also created a new grant program, which is called Wood Products Infrastructure Assistance. So I'm just interested in how do you see that money being spent? Anything else you want to say about the importance of this? And I think while we have been able to benefit from this really to revitalize our industry and bring back some of those jobs we had been devastated by the losses of, I can see how it's going to impact some of my colleagues into the future as well.
You know, Congresswoman Pingree, we're of the mindset now that we want to work with all of our partners to look at what are those opportunities out there. And you mentioned some of the ones that we are working on, but we also want to create the opportunity to be creative on what's possible. We do know that we're learning a lot. Cellulose nanomaterial is another one of those things that we are looking at. We know
I'm
that
glad you can say that term, because I don't dare bring it up because I can't get it out right all the time, but it's amazing what, you can make plastic from trees,
right,
basically.
and it strengthens material. In fact, it's known to strengthen concrete by 19%, which use less rebar and things like that. And so also putting in bumper of cars. So we are looking at really trying to move into the innovative period to look at different uses for wood, different uses for woods that's not used in a traditional way. We still need the traditional way of using wood, but there's so much more material out there that we generally burn or we just pile. And so rather than to do that, what can we do to create economic opportunities for our communities to create? And so we want to look at the science community, both university system as well as private and federal, and put our heads together. And we are starting to explore that. I'm really pleased with what we're able to do now with some of the type of science and the type of research that we're finding for different uses of wood. And I look for us to continue creating new opportunities. I also see us making shifts to a new type of industry. And I'm really pleased to see a lot of our researchers and scientists working with the university system as well as the private and even the military to look at ways of using wood. And as, I don't know what we're going to do as a country, but as we look at ecosystem services, and as we look at even potentially some type of a cap and trade system for carbon sequestration, what are the opportunities there that we can be looking at, and how do we begin to account for what we do and how much carbon is lost, how much carbon is sequestered? And so I think we're just exploring those types of things, but I'm pretty excited about the potential.
That's great. And I would just add, and, you know, anytime any of my colleagues want to come visit some of the work we're doing in Maine, it's very interesting, and some of it is in former paper mills. Our wood fiber insulation facility that is about to go online will employ 100 people. And that's one of those, it's like cross-laminate timber. It's one of those entities that once, you know, they're established, then they'll be looking to do that in other places around the country, because it's a relatively new product for the United States, but it's used in Europe all the time. So, you know, there are great implications for all of these things. And the other thing I think often people forget, and particularly from the environmental sector, think, oh, well, we can't cut any more trees. But the fact is, you cut a tree, you use that wood product in construction, and the carbon in that tree is stored forever. So you've done your carbon sequestration job twice, once you're growing the tree and then once when you keep it in the building. So I think the more we're getting back to using wood products in building is just a win-win for all of us. So I yield back. Thank you very much.
It doesn't want to stay on.
No, it doesn't want to stay on.
Would you like to use mine?
Oh, there it is. I was just going to say, and the worst thing you can do for sequestration is to burn that tree. And that's what happens with the wildfires out there. It's amazing the amount of carbon we put in the air through wildfires.
Right.
And I mean, we try to save carbon, sequester carbon, all that kind of stuff, and then boom, you know, it's amazing. Anyway, Mr. Cloud.
Thanks again. Thanks for sticking around. I wanted to, sorry, I'm right under the speaker, kind of create some feedback. Maybe this one, not if you turn it off. This is my colleague from Texas. Knows me too well, doesn't want me to be heard.
I'm worried they're Texans, they'll be heard.
Says this guy.
We were talking about cooperation with local law enforcement, and I'm wondering from firefighters, because part of the budget is a big plus up with firefighters, and we want the firefighters to be paid, you know, what the rate is and what they should be paid. But I am wondering where we get to the point of where they going to even just because we raise the budget doesn't make immediately there to be more firefighters, and so we can draw firefighters, but sometimes depending on the region, we'll just be drawing them from the state or local firefighters, which will solve one problem, create another, which makes me, I'm wondering if there's a way, or if maybe there's a program already in place about local, regional, state cooperation, if you could speak to that, what we can do to, you know, maybe supplement what's going on locally already, to help, you know, because sometimes, you know, they do tremendous work and are far braver than I would be in that certain circumstance, but some of it is waiting around for a problem to be solved as well, you know, to arise. And anyway, if you could speak to maybe if that's a potential or
Sure.
what's standing in the way of that might happening.
Well, so let me start from a self-serving point of view first. That's been part of the Forest Service's problem. You know, we've lost a lot of our journey level firefighters, and they have gone on into the wildfire community, whether that's with states or other entities, and it's created a loss of experience for us. The good news, though, is that most of the Forest Service's hiring is at the lower end of the level, so we're not taking generally from other benefits. We are bringing people in, training them, and then they're going out into the wildfire community generally, not always, generally. And to give you an example, when we talk about hiring 11,300 firefighters, most of those are at the GS 8, 9 below. And the majority of them is at the GS 5 and 6 level. And when you talk about hotshot crews, who is a very experienced crews, a lot of them are GS 6s. Some are GS 5s. So we have really, really technical experts at that low end of the scale. And of course, they're going to go on to where they can be paid better. And that's why this FY '24 budget is such a blessing to the agency, because it gives us an opportunity to pay the federal firefighters a fair compensation to the other non-federal firefighters.
I'm on board with that. The question I'm having is, that, how do we, we have to build a pipeline to train them, to get them in. It doesn't suddenly make more firefighters available when we're looking at all the issues we need to solve nationally. Do you have the mechanism? Is there a plan in place to have cooperation with?
Oh, yes.
State
In
and
fact,
local?
each state
I get
has agreements.
Right.
On how we are gonna approach firefighting. In fact, the state of Idaho, we met with the governor just recently there, looking at signing an agreement between the Forest Service and the state. And generally how that works is the closest resource responds to the initial attack. And it's for a certain amount of hours, and then, then you look at what the agreement says in terms of how reimbursements are made. So we do have that across the country in different states to really talk about how, when a fire happens, how are each of the entities are going to work together. But when you look at the firefighting now in most areas, it's mixed. It is a combination of state, county, volunteer fire departments, paid fire department, as well as the federal firefighters.
Okay. I guess what I was wondering, you don't feel like there's any authorities or any hurdles in the way of you being able to supplement what you're doing with local resources and to pay them?
We're already doing a lot of that now. In addition to just looking at, let's just say, the federal firefighters, Forest Service firefighters, we have what we call ADs, administrative determined. So we have about 6,000 that we can pull from there. We also have what we call militia, and that is a part of the organization that are not qualified as firefighters, but they have the qualifications and the certification for different parts of the firefighting program. And when I look at the South, whether that's Texas or just the general South and the East, most of their firefighting workforce is militia. So that 11,300 firefighters does not include that number of folks, nor does it include the 6,000 ADs that we can draw from, nor does it include the, all of the neighbors, whether it's the state folks, a county, or a volunteer fire department. Altogether, 2 years ago, to give you an example, we had about 33,000 firefighters at one time out fighting fires. And that was a combination of state, federal, local, volunteer, and as well as private contract firefighters.
Okay. The only other thing I guess I'd say is I'd want to echo what Secretary Zinke was saying about, housing versus studies. And that's kind of what I was getting to when I was like, it seems like there's some overhead. I'm trying to figure out where it is. When a project's listed, this project cost us this much, to know how much of that was actually infrastructure versus the litigation involved in it. I'd be curious to know how much you are spending on litigation and not only, preparing for it, but the settlements that are going out as well, to see what needs to be done there. We like to think that's above board and that it's accountability check, and certainly sometimes it is, but I've been here in DC long enough to know some of that is a little self-dealing that's going on politically.
Would you like for us to provide you that?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, if you could. That'd be good to know as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you've said that have been here a lot for many, many chiefs, but you haven't been to Penn Show, so you're not that old. So a couple comments. When I talk about go to the front line with the wildland firefighters themselves, a lot of our seasonal, and what they're telling me is they're living on overtime.
Yes.
Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the overtime hours that a number of our firefighters are making, it depends on the fire year, of course, but anywhere from 600 to 1,200 hours of overtime.
And they're saying they couldn't make it without overtime. Is that?
Well, it depends on where they live. That is true. And then you have to worry about an overworked workforce when that happens.
So, and then also pay equity real quickly, the tribal firefighters.
Yes.
A lot of times, you know, in Montana, side by side, there was an Elmo fire, you have two groups, and as bad as the Forest Service pay is, I think the tribal pay is even worse. So, you know, and there's a lot of troops that, you know, same thing that they have. They get someone qualified and they'll leave to you, and then you'll put more training on them, then they'll leave. Are you concerned also? Because we depend on our tribal firefighters also for force. Are you looking at the umbrella of not only your troops, but theirs as well as pay?
Well, I can't look after the tribe, but I'll tell you, I do think it's unfair. I do think something has to be done about that. I think when you look at the firefighting community, you know, what's fair and what's good, it should be for everyone.
I would agree. Lastly, the Good Neighbor Program. Let's talk about something that's good. So what I'm seeing and talking to different counties and the states, they are, you know, the Good Neighbor Program, it began kind of as a pilot program, has continued to expand it. It seems like it's a great program. Would you be in favor of looking at expanding that program, perhaps on acres or a forest as a whole, perhaps as a pilot?
Yeah, you know, one of the really great things about the, and there's many great things, but about the 2018 Farm Bill is that it allowed that to happen. Now, we believe that under the Good Neighbor Authority, you know, where you used to have timber sale receipts, the states can keep those receipts. And so we have a lot of agreements with the states. Where we do not have that is with the counties and the tribes. And that's probably why we don't have much participation from the counties and tribes, because right now, under the existing bill, they're not allowed to keep the receipts. I do believe that if that was changed, then you would see a lot more participation with the Good Neighbor Authority, because it really is a great tool for how we do our work.
And last question, Mr. And thank you. I agree with you on that. So, you know, Europe. I've always looked at their forests. You know, they don't tend to have the catastrophic burns. They manage, and perhaps it's a little unfair to compare apples and oranges because they don't have the wilderness. They probably when a tree is first beginning, they know when they're gonna harvest it. They're Germans. They're very efficient. But what I do admire is they don't have the problem of doing a single timber sale. And perhaps we should look at a forest more holistic, because we know what the sustainable yield is. We know that that's the amount of material that has to come out of the forest, and it's coming out one way or the other, as a burn or by harvest or innovation. So it's coming out of the forest. But the Europeans do it where they have one contract, a longer period, and they don't have individual timber sales that are subject to litigation. And so the throughput over time is more predictable, it's known. Have you heard of that? Have you looked at that management scheme on a forest before?
No, I have not compared what we do to what the Europeans do. I will say also that, you know, we are doing, I feel like we're doing an excellent job based on the laws that governs us. And if they were to change, then we could potentially change how we do business as well.
It seems to me a forest is a breathing entity. And what we're doing is we're stopping, we're starting, we're stopping, we're starting, we're fighting fires, but it's not a journey, which we know, and a lot of the health of the forest at risk, whether it's watershed. So you know, I encourage us all, you know, to look at maybe a pilot program on a forest scale of, you know, that scale, and look at it and see if we can do longer-term contracts so we have a known throughput, so the investment can be there. So if you're a startup business, you say, look, there's going to be this amount of material. I don't know where it's going to come from, but it's going to come from the forest. And that's why we rely on foresters to tell us, look, whether it's a selective cut or a little more aggressive or a little less aggressive, you know, that's what you guys do. So I would encourage us all to look at maybe a couple of pilot programs in different regions, you know, to look at a different model that perhaps would sidestep some of the point litigation that is going on a small timber sale. So, thank you, and I wish you the best of luck. I think you're doing a great job, and you have a tough task ahead of you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Congressman.
Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. And you'll notice most of the questions have been about wildfire fighting. And obviously, it is a huge issue for you. And what you describe is you're training people that are then going to higher pay and stuff, you know. We're hearing from the tribes in every entity, they train the law enforcement officers, and the law enforcement officers then they go to the cities that, you know, have a higher pay. This is throughout government. I was a city councilman in Blackfoot, and we had towns of 50,000 people 25 miles on each side of us, and we were a town of 10,000. We were the training ground for Idaho Falls and Pocatello. You know, that's a problem. And I told the tribes during the hearing that we're going to try to solve that somehow. So it's the same problem that you have.
Yeah.
But, and you talk about the different groups that are organizations that fight wildfires, that it's not necessarily just one, just you. When I was, I think my second year here, I called my chief of staff when he was out in Idaho in August and said, hey, let's go fight a wildfire. And he looked at me like I was crazy. I said, no, I called, they had the huge fire up in Salmon, Idaho, Clear Creek Fire. And I said, I called the chief of the superintendent of the forest up there and said, we'd like to come up and have you treat us as if we were a wildfire fighting couple of people. So they brought us up. I said, we're not bringing any press or anything like that. We just want to learn what it takes to fight one of these fires. And that's a town of 5,000 people that had to be set up to fight this wildfire. It's stunning, the logistics of what it takes to fight one of these wildfires. How do you know the next day? How do you predict where it's going to blow up? Make sure you have the people in place, that they have the water, the food, safety, and that kind of stuff. It is amazing. So we got to go to their planning session. Then we got to take food to them the next morning for breakfast around the mountain. And I mean, you know, it's like a 30-mile trip to get around the mountain. But there were federal firefighters, there were state firefighters, there were local firefighters, the Army was there, we had some National Guard there. I mean, it is a combination of everything. And they ought to all be treated equally. So,
I agree.
anyway, I thank you for being here today. It's been a good discussion. There are a lot of areas that the Forest Service covers that we didn't get into questions today, but we have a number of questions that we're going to be submitting to you, and would like a written response as quickly as you can get. And if members have additional comments or statements, they should submit those to the committee within, 5 days, so that we can get those questions to you too, and we would appreciate it very much. But again, thank you for being here today and taking our questions. We look forward to working with you as we work through this budget year.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Committee stands adjourned. Good job. And thanks for putting up with the eagle. I know that kind of steals the show, doesn't it?
Come on.